Hello and welcome to this video. I'm very pleased to be chatting today to Robert MacCOUN, who is, well, do you want to tell us who you are, Robert? Because there's a lot of information there.
Yeah, so I'm Andy's Patreon, first and foremost, but I also have a day job when I'm not watching Andy Widget. So I'm a professor at Stanford University, and a little strange. I'm actually a professor of law, but I've never taken a class in law. I'm actually a psychologist by training, and um, and so my research is at the intersection of science and law, the nature of evidence in the courts, in other domains of life, uh, and
So when I found out that Robert was had this background, there is a thing that looms over my channel. I've talked about aesthetics so much. I've talked about beauty so much. What I haven't talked about is truth, and I would say that you are definitely an expert in truth, as much as anybody can be, I suppose. And you contacted me the other day, and you said you've got a new book coming out, which I haven't read yet because it's not out. You sent me a few bits, but I haven't had a chance to look at that, I'm afraid. But I think it'd be really interesting to get in what you're exploring in the book. It's not just by you, is it? You've got a couple of other specialists in there, haven't you?
yeah. So the book is um, called Third Millennium Thinking: Making Sense in a World of Nonsense. It's written for the general public. What makes the book unusual, I think, is that it's written by a physicist, a philosopher, and a psychologist. So we're kind of working through the P's there. If we had added one more author, we could have had a poet, I guess, or a proctologist, or but we yeah. So my co-authors, Saul Perlmutter has a Nobel Prize in physics for his work on the expansion of the universe, and um, John Campbell is a professional philosopher who's written a lot about the mind and about truth and some of these issues. And the book the book grew out of our sense of dread and anxiety about the state of public discourse in our country, but I think in many countries, and sort of the increasing inability that people have to not only to solve problems together, but to even agree on the nature of the world, what the facts are. And so the book is partly about science's proven track record for figuring out what's true about the world and why that's important. But it's not a book about that says uh, scientists are always right, or you have to listen to the scientist. It's not even a book that says you have to master all the findings of science. Really, in talking about it, we came to realize that scientists as a profession, just by the nature of what they do, have had to learn how to work together with people they disagree with and try to figure out, make progress. You think this, I think this. Okay, so let's do a test and try to see, is one of us right? Often we're both wrong, and some third possibility is right. And so we started realizing that in the process of becoming scientists, there are a lot of unwritten principles that across the sciences that people learn to make this work. And they don't always enforce it properly, and so we call these habits of mind, thinking, certain kinds of thinking habits, but also habits of community. The habits of community is important because even if you have all of these habits of mind, it's really hard to live up to these habits of mind. And we all fall short of these habits of mind. We all slip into making mistakes and confirmation bias and things like that. So habits of community, scientists learn how to gently or sometimes not so gently steer each other like, whoa, you're not making sense here. What you're saying is not making sense here, or this doesn't sound right to me. And pointing out each other's mistakes. And we get tough skin from learning to do that in empirical research. But, so the book is arguing that you don't have to be a scientist to learn these habits of mind and habits of community. And in fact, that society could really benefit from a lot of these.
So yeah, I mean, what you're saying is firing off so much in me. I've got to get my mind ordered. So let's just start with the first thing that's in my head, which is the fact that anyone who's watching this video, it's Philosophy Sunday, and anybody who watches on a Philosophy Sunday knows that I could go anywhere. But they may be thinking, well, how does this relate to music and art? The pursuit of truth. What's that got to do with it? Well, there's some people who thinks that great art is a kind of truth. And so that's something to be discussed. But you are also a musician, as evidenced by your very strange instruments dangling from behind.
Yeah.
But you're a jazz guitarist as well, I believe. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm an amateur jazz guitarist, and for about 12 years, I gigged regularly in restaurants for.
If you can play jazz at that level, you can't be that bad because it's hard to do that.
Yeah, I mean, over the years, I made dozens of dollars in tips, maybe two dozen, but it didn't make any money at it. It was just pure fun. And by the way, we can touch on this more later, but in the book, in the acknowledgments, we talk about our musical collaborators.
I wanted to start there as well. I want to know what sort of music you like, and what you're into. What drew you to my channel. I assume if you played jazz guitar, it's more the jazz end. So who would be your jazz guitar
Well,
hero?
actually, it's interesting because jazz came later for me. But I'm 10 years older than you. So I was in high school in 72 to 76, the golden years of Prague. And I went to see all these bands. It's funny because we didn't call it Prague. It was just good music. But I knew that I liked UFO and Ted Nugent, whatever my friends were listening. I could enjoy that. But there were certain bands where I was having this visceral response, this emotional response to this sort of transcendental feeling, and the early, I think for me, Yes, this Fragile album was probably the first prog album that I got. And quickly thereafter, Thick as a Brick. And then I discovered Genesis, Court of the Crimson King. And, so that's where I really begin to dive deep into music in my life. But later, it's a natural progression, I think, for many of us to get into jazz fusion through the prog angle rather than through the jazz angle. And then, like many people, all these artists are talking about John Coltrane and Miles Davis, and so I start tracing that back. I get Bitches Brew a few years after it came out. I'm totally baffled. I was totally baffled. I couldn't make any sense of it. And it didn't even sound like what I thought fusion was supposed to be, because I was listening to Mahavishnu Orchestra, and it didn't sound like Mahavishnu Orchestra.
The same thing happened to me.
But then I started checking out Wayne Shorter and Joe Zawinul and all the people that are on that album. And before I knew it, I was listening to their influences and really developing a love for especially sort of the Blue Note era jazz. And then I wanted to learn, what are they doing? So I wanted to learn how to play it. And I also wanted to stop playing just in my bedroom. I wanted to actually interact with other musicians in real time. So that was a great source of, I haven't been doing it regularly for a few years now, but I'm really glad that I got, a decade or so of really having that on a regular basis, trying to wing my way through solos, out on the tightrope. And every once in a while you have these special moments where you just feel like it all comes together. And then you lose the thread and you're trying to find your way back. And, it was thrilling. And so I didn't start with jazz, but I ended up backing my way into jazz, I guess is what I would say.
And who did you see in the early 70s? Did you get to see the Mahavishnu Orchestra, for example?
No. One of my great regrets in life is that I didn't see the original Mahavishnu Orchestra. And the thing is, I could have. Um, Now, it was not easy for me to go to concerts. Bands like that would play. I lived outside of the city of Chicago, and it might be on Mahavishnu might have been playing on a school night, or I wouldn't be able to get a car, or so there are a few bands that I didn't see at their peak. I didn't see Gabriel with Genesis. I didn't see Mahavishnu. I did the most recent live McLaughlin album with Jimmy Herring, where they're playing Mahavishnu. I was at that concert. I had the farthest seat from the stage. I was dead center in the very last row. But that was thrilling because they played all the Mahavishnu stuff. But I didn't get to see that. My first rock concert was Passion Play, Jethro Tull's Passion Play tour. Still one of the best concerts I've ever saw. But
They were such a virtuoso band, weren't they, Jethro Tull at that?
Absolutely. They were so well rehearsed, so tight, funny. And I saw Yes back then, and I also saw Zeppelin and The Who and a lot of the major rock bands, Rolling Stones. It's interesting. None of them were actually very good. Zeppelin, Stones, and The Who. I saw them all at their in their peak years in the 70s, and it's partly because there were so many drunk musicians on stage. Which people don't really talk about this so much now.
No,
but
I know exactly that. That's exactly right.
People you see musicians with a bottle of Jack Daniels, and I've heard bootlegs of some of the concerts I went to, and some of those were terrible. On the other hand, bands like Jethro Tull, yes, early Kansas, I saw Kansas very early on. Dixie Dregs, I saw very early on. These bands were just absolutely stunning live, and I'm so glad I got to see them in that.
But straight away, we're at a heresy here, aren't we? You are transgressing the grand narrative that the greatest bands in the world were Led Zeppelin, and the people went to these shows, and it was like a religious experience, and in reality, not so not so great. There's a great quote from John McLaughlin when they asked him about the Rolling Stones, because obviously in London he was playing around the same time as the Rolling Stones, and someone asked him what he thought, and he said, "Well, he goes, they sounded terrible then, and they sound terrible now."
Yeah, it's interesting because there are bands that I actually prefer to listen to their live albums. King Crimson would be an example. When I listen to King Crimson, I mostly listen to the live albums. But some of the classic rock bands, I can't listen to their live albums. They're just not good enough. But Jimmy Page was a master in the studio. So Robert Plant, I should say, was great live. Robert Plant, it was Jimmy Page was the problem, I think.
I bet he was.
But Robert Plant really brought it live. So, yeah.
How did you go from these sort of classic rock bands and prog bands to the jazz fusion? What was that journey like?
So, I mean, to be honest, for me, the hook of fusion was virtuoso guitar playing. I was looking for virtuoso guitar players, and people were saying, okay, if you're amazed by the Steve House of the world, you need to graduate on to John McLaughlin, and like you, I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name, McLaughlin. But so I remember buying the Intermounting Flame album just after it came out, and my experience of that album was this combination of wonder and terror. I couldn't understand what was coming out of the speakers. And it was like, I mean, the only other album I think that probably had that visceral, physical impact on me was probably In the Court of the Crimson King by King Crimson. But just this feeling of what is happening here. And I can't say I actually liked it at first, in an aesthetic sense. I didn't actually enjoy it, but I couldn't look away. It was like I had to know what this was. And so pretty quickly thereafter, I discovered Return to Forever. And Weather Report took a couple of years for me to get, maybe because there was no guitarist. So I couldn't grab on. But of course, Al Di Meola, how could you not grab on to Return to Forever? Yeah, I was exposed to Frank Zappa in the 70s, but for me, originally I didn't think of Frank Zappa being a musician. I thought he was a comedian. I think to the extent that I knew who he was, I really thought he was just like Weird Al Yankovic or something. I just thought he was a comedian, and I didn't really. It wasn't until years later that I realized what a profound musician he was. But there was this. It was easy to make a transition into jazz rock fusion at that time because the people who were a few years older than me were all saying, if you like, if you're listening to Yes and King Crimson and you want to take the next step, Mahavishnu, Mahavishnu.
And these things change, when I'm here because of getting Birds of Fire. And then the other guitarist that I had, which I don't talk about so much, but was also the same sort of astonishment, was Alan Holdsworth. I heard him on a Soft Machine album. It wasn't Bundles. It wasn't actually a great Soft Machine album. It's called Land of Cocaine, and it's sort of the last proper Soft Machine album they made. And it's more of a Carl Jenkins album. It's got sort of strings on there and it's very composed. But I absolutely love that album because I liked it. It was quite a good fusion album. Then when Holdsworth came on, I actually didn't know what I was listening to. It really, I was astonished, And this feeling that it's very interesting talking to you because there's a couple of things here that's fascinating. Is how if you go into academia, there's people out there that this music has played a very important part of their lives in the same way as it has with musicians. For me, this is like the esoteric aspect of art where nobody discusses this. And you just said, that you didn't like it, but it held your attention and you wanted to know what it was. Same thing with Bitches Brew. So what is that knowing? You with the, what do you think that is? Is it knowing?
I think a lot of people who are attracted to academic life, who become academicians, are there's just this curiosity, wanting to push beyond what you currently know, and the idea that you could actually make a living, being able to explore these new ideas, and and some of that is just, for a lot of people, is aesthetic. So talking about truth. For some people, they're doing it in the realm of science, but certainly, for other people, it's primarily. But I think if you look biographically at people in science, there are a lot of musicians in the sciences. So my co-author, Saul Perlmutter, this physicist, Nobel laureate, is a well-trained classical musician and plays in string quartets, and he's and he teaches a course on the physics of music, and a lot of mathematicians are interested in, and I think jazz in particular, for me, as a conceptual system, trying to wrap my head around this conceptual system, what's going on here? How, because I think, like many people, I had this idea that jazz musicians were just wild people who were just playing whatever came into their head, and that it was just purely coming from the gut. And then I started realizing, I would try to play from the gut and it didn't sound anything like jazz. And I started realizing there's something else going on here. And then trying to tackle this, this conceptual system of what underlies jazz, it's it's like learning computer programming or something, it's really it's very demanding, but also very liberating too, because once you learn to work with these constraints, it starts opening up ways of exploring musical spaces that you really couldn't do if you didn't understand some of that. So,
Well,
yeah.
well, then when I was very young, I can remember um, reading about Pythagoras and
Mhm.
how Pythagoras had developed the sort of Western system of scales, triads, and scales and the ratios, and then how uh, the very term, rational comes from the ratios within a musical scale. And I found this fascinating that there was a unification right at the sort of the beginnings of sort of our civilization from a sort of rational point of view, of searching for truth, that these two things were unified. And the thing that fascinated me when I read about Pythagoras is that the visceral enjoyment of the music they weren't interested in. So they never played two notes at the same time. It was all monophonic because and I think they knew they could, and they knew those harmonies would be there, but it would almost be too enjoyable.
Yeah.
That fascinated me, that idea, and then the sort of history of that running out. So I feel that there's a split, and it's an essential split for our civilization. The way we've been able to elucidate truth and the way we've been able to negotiate what's beautiful. Those two things have run together. But I'd like to start here. Do you think that we could see if we just took of a material universe, we could see that as being chaotic, or we could see that as being ordered? Now, is that the realm of truth, or is that something human beings do? So, if a scientist is looking for, is a scientist looking for order? Are they looking for patterns, and do they believe those patterns will be exist throughout everywhere? That's what I would say. Science is that's the fundamental assumption. That's the truth they're looking for.
So yeah, so my feeling about this is that many many of us get caught in a conceptual trap of distinguishing between the notion that science is showing us objective reality and that it's truly objective, which I don't think is a defensible proposition, with a different idea, which is that science is a way of trying to move toward understanding what the world is, and you're always moving. You never arrive. You're never there. And so I think, sometimes when I see people make some statement about what music actually is, definitively, it's it's a little too rigid for me. And so the people, the Pythagorean kinds of
Yeah.
people who have these sort of Platonic notions of what the true ideal music is. I don't know. Is it, it's now I think it's interesting that there are certain physical regularities in physics about music, like the harmonic series.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. But that doesn't begin to um, encapsulate this visceral experience we have, and the emotional visceral experience we have. These theories, Robert Fripp, I think, is interesting to me. So, of course, the guitarist for King Crimson, because he's so thoughtful and articulate. But he's been struggling his whole career to try to put into words his feelings about his relationship to music. And it certainly seems like for him, music is actually it's almost personified for him. Music is like this entity that is, if he lines everything up just right in the way he lives his life, and he keeps himself quiet and calm, maybe the music will come through him
Yeah.
and channel through.
Well, there's this to me. What the thing with art and music is the very thing that confounds people is the thing it's trying to do, and they won't go, well, that's obviously what music is trying to do. So if we take that principle, for example, I would say that that's the dichotomy of the author and the revelation, right? So there's some people believe that when they make music, it's like they are, it's that they're authoring their feelings about the world, and of course that is the case to some extent. That's always the case. But we take people like Mozart, Beethoven, and that's, you could go down that alley of the author, and they're almost like the king. They're like they're like a dictator, totalitarian dictator of artistic space. And then, I interviewed Jack Jennings on Friday, and the thing he said that's about indie music is they believe they're revealing something that's already there. And most musicians, when they do get onto that place where they're just playing, they almost sit back in astonishment, don't they? Going, "Well, this is all going really well." And whilst they're thinking that, their fingers are doing the right thing, and so you do feel like you're revealing something in a true sense of the word. So that dichotomy against about the author and this idea that you are just a conduit to the universal great spirit of whatever it is, that what's actually happening, those two things are actually working together. So you're marrying two concepts together, which actually there's no other place where you can do that but art and music. And all the different art forms, they marry those in a certain place. So, as much as we could talk about Pythagoras and ratio and harmonies and stuff like that, the music doesn't exist in that. It exists in all the bits that are in between that. And we know that, a singer makes a song great because they're out of time and out of tune. They're not on the grid. You go too far away from the grid, and then it just starts to sound like noise. And culturally, there's certain points where we've had to move away from the grid and get as close to noise as we possibly can. And so I feel that with the Mahavishnu Orchestra, which is coming out of really aesthetically out of John Coltrane, what you have is that Indian classical idea of revelation, but you have that Western idea of the person in the middle of it, and you have additionally that idea of angst, which comes from the blues. It's an expression of angst, and that's why Coltrane and John McLaughlin sound like they're so. It doesn't sound like Ravi Shankar because it sounds like he's almost on the point of a breakdown. It's a primal scream, and I think that we recognise those balances in art, and it chimes with us because then we can get control of something that normally in life is very confusing, which is the sort of head and the heart, Apollo Dionysian sort of contradiction that we have, but which is essential for our civilization. It's almost like in discovering rationalism, there's a compromise in that there's angst that comes with it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Do you think that's true?
Oh, absolutely. And I think you can see that angst in the early 20th century, and it led to a lot of great art, actually. That sense of angst, artists tried to express that on the canvas. And I think we're in a new era of angst, and hopefully it will lead to great art. But I go back and forth about this issue of, is there any objectivity to aesthetics? And certainly we had a recent breakthrough, which is Andy Edwards' superiometer, which look like for once we have an opportunity to actually get the objective truth, and you've done great videos with that. But
as a thought experiment, did you like that? Because that's me trying to tackle with this idea of because the thing is you could say art's subjective, but as soon as you accept that, you go, but it's not really, is it? Because we all know that if
I think you were having great fun with us, but I think there was something serious there too. And I will say, I almost don't want to jinx it by saying the unspoken parts out loud, but we all understand that you're doing this with a sense of play when you do that. And by the way, your funniest videos with that are the ones where you don't signal. I'm just playing now. When you sometimes in some of your videos you say, okay, I'm just teasing here, but I actually like it when you when you go full deadpan and
One of
you
the early ones I did. I will bring the superiometer back at some point. I was thinking about it the other day because but I'm going to do it slightly different next time.
yeah, but no, I mean, because you were, I mean, I have often wondered. So, for example, to take a Prague example, it seems to me, it feels objectively true that Emerson, Lake and Palmer's Love Beach is a much worse album than Brain Salad Surgery or Trilogy. I mean, it just feels objective. It doesn't feel like I'm having a subjective reaction. And yet, if I actually try to break down musically what they're doing, um, if you wrote it, if you charted it out, it would be very hard on the paper to see
Yeah.
really what is it. Now you might say there's less complexity in Love Beach, but that I don't actually think that's the issue. And there are some really stunning prog pieces that are actually not that complex, but still transcendent. So it feels right to say there's objectively something different about those albums, but it's very elusive to try to figure out,
Well,
you know.
this is fascinating. I even thought of doing a video on this because I just say Love Beach is terrible. I did the 10 worst prog albums. I put it on the list. The truth is, Works 2 is worse, right?
Yeah,
Works
incoherent.
2 is worse than Love Beach. Love Beach has got some great things about it. The epic is nowhere near as bad as, you know, the epics that are on Works 2. I can't even remember what that was called, you know.
But even the fact that I'm nodding my head when you say Works 2 is worse, like
So this is
how is it that I immediately can agree with you if there's not something objective? I mean, is it just coincidence that everyone who listens to prog happens to have the same subjectivity? I don't know. Or is there actually some objective sense in which, I would say Works 2 is noticeably worse than
well,
Works.
but the thing is that when it comes to aesthetics, what it is the cover is truly awful, and I feel sorry for them because I can imagine if I was in a band and I was, we were down in Nassau and it's a lovely evening, and oh, shall we go and take a photograph?
Mm.
I mean, if it wasn't called Love Beach, it had that photograph, it wouldn't be so bad. It's just a big mistake, and I think the error is to not get what the culture they get it culturally wrong, whereas Works 2 doesn't get it so wrong, and that's the big faux pas because they're not in step with what's going on. Because art does that, and I think that's one of the things with art that it's got a very important purpose. And when we spot it not working, of course it's not objective. I think objectivity and subjectivity, if you just scrap those as ideas, just scrap them, and see that that's the way we can look at the world in a subjective way, or we can look at the world in an objective way. It's two different ways that human beings look at the world. That's what the conclusion I've come to, and we can do both. And isn't that great? But they're two ends of the same telescope. If that
Yeah,
makes
I mean, when people try to study, because there is a literature on the science of music, um, but they aren't literally they don't literally have a beauty scale, where they assign a number to beauty that's all agreed upon by all scientists. Mostly what they're doing are things like when people are listening to music, they measure what's happening in the brain, and they try to find interesting things that are happening in the brain. Or why do some cultures agree on certain musical patterns and phenomena and other cultures don't? So they're not really talking about objectivity or absolute measurement. They're just trying to understand, what's going on here. And like, there's been some really interesting science of music work. There's recent work on a woman wonderful name, Psyche Louis, who studies improvisation and what's happening in the brains of musicians when they improvise.
Yeah,
And
I've read bits of those, and the truth is nothing. I've been saying it's
yeah, so one of the
there's less
things,
going
yeah,
on than normal.
yeah, I mean, so certainly, I mean, one of the things that I do think when we study the brain and we study how people make truth judgments or how people make aesthetic judgments, um, I mean, there might have been a fantasy at one point that there would be a dedicated module in the brain for truth, and it would be located somewhere other than the dedicated module for aesthetics. And there's a little bit of truth to that. So truth judgments happen more prefrontally, more around here.
Yeah.
There's a little bit more activation in the brain, a little farther back or deeper in the amygdala with aesthetic judgments. But there's huge amount of overlap. Prefrontal cognitive is very active when people are listening to music, but also the amygdala, this very emotional center, when people judge truth, that's also lighting up. So at least in the brain, they don't seem to be completely divorced from each other.
And this is fascinating because it's what I believe it's sort of agreeing and completely disagreeing at the same time. I fundamentally think that these things are together in our experience, but I think there's a utility in us splitting them apart, and I think that's an evolved. I don't know what I'm talking about. This is what I want to chat to you about. I believe that's an evolved thing. I believe we're fundamentally grasping for animals, grasping for pleasure, and then looking over our shoulder for threats. That's what I think. Well, that's who we are and those two ideas of the grasping for pleasure, and then and to put it more precisely, then going, yeah, but that berry is poisonous. Well, how do you know it's poisonous? Because so and so ate that last week and they weren't very well.
Yeah.
So there's that's morality there.
Yeah, no, it's adaptive in an evolutionary sense to try to distinguish aesthetics from truth. So for example, there are, a lot of my research earlier in my career was on psychoactive drugs, and there are psychoactive drugs that offer profoundly tantalizing aesthetic experiences, some of which can really lead you into a pretty screwed up life, and if your brain was only exclusively chasing after the rush, chasing after this beauty, aesthetics, it could lead you into a lot of trouble. And so I do think there has been utility in teasing these things apart, and certainly I think that when someone tries to reduce aesthetics to some objective system, we always feel like something's being left out. But in the same way, when aesthetic people start telling us, not distinguishing between truth and beauty, that can also lead us astray. I think some postmodern thought has kind of blurred those distinctions in ways that I think was not helpful.
Yeah. I'll tell you that the thing that got me to this position is that there's a TED talk by a neuroscientist. It's a lady who's a neuroscientist. She had a stroke, and I can't remember which side of the brain she had the stroke on, but it basically it wiped out meaning. And she said she knew she was having a stroke, and she knew what part of the brain was going on, and she thought, I've got to phone somebody up and tell them. And she said she got the phone out, and then she said it was basically a categorical function went. That's the best way I could describe it. Because she said, firstly, she couldn't distinguish the numbers. The numbers had no meaning anymore. They were just shapes. And then the phone had no edge. It was just experience was coming in. And what was fascinating, she said the more she went into this, the more she experienced absolute bliss. This ultimate mindfulness was so blissful. But really, we are living in a society where everybody talks about mindfulness and trying to be in the moment. If we were truly in the moment, it would be a disaster. So that morals come from these categories. The ability to inflict a grid onto our experience is the only way I could describe it. So that I found very interesting. Now I know you're going to probably laugh about this now, because this is probably, in terms of psychology, is a very old concept which has been probably debunked, and I'm not an academic, so I don't know this. But when I was a teenager, I was in the library at college, and I found a book by Julian Jaynes
Yeah.
called The Origin of Consciousness in the Bicameral Mind. I took this home and read it, and it had a profound experience, a profound effect on me. I've never mentioned it on the channel in terms of a reference because I know it's probably rubbish. It's like it's an old idea. I don't know anything about Julian James. I'm sure you know a lot about him, but I found this idea of um, Julian James had this idea that in sort of quite recent history, say, would it be around about the time of Homer, that rather than us having a consciousness that was where we were inside ourselves, making decisions, our decisions were made by ourselves, but it was a disembodied voice. And the thing I found fascinating was that it was the reason why he said we developed this inner voice. Now, how true is Julian James? Was he right? He was a crank. What's
Yeah. So so that book had really made a big impression on me. And but I would say, and I treasure my copy of it, but I would say it's almost like pornography hidden under the mattress for me.
Could you
Because
explain to the viewers what Julian James said? Because I've done a really bad, and you know it so much better than me.
no, but I think part of the issue is that a lot of brain scientists with more expertise than me think that along the way he gets various things wrong or he plays fast and loose.
Yeah.
But it is just such a breathtakingly vast thesis. He's reading Homer and showing that the way Homer wrote implied that Homer's brain literally worked differently, that one hemisphere of his brain was not connected with the other one, so that the only way one side of his brain could learn from the other side is to hear the voice of a god. And I mean, it's such a wild.
I literally was reading this, and I was going, "Why has nobody said this? Why didn't my mum and dad not tell me about this?" I can't explain how much it impressed me. And the thing is, I'm an artist. I'm a creator. These things stay with you, and I think what I found fascinating was the idea of these hemispheres, these two. So, what do you know about that? How does that actually work in reality?
So, one thing I should say is it's not that we know James is wrong. It's that we know that his arguments played fast and loose and aren't always really in accordance with the research.
But could we have had auditory hallucinations back 4,000?
It is clearly true. It is well established that the two hemispheres of the brain are, in most people, are actually doing qualitatively different things cognitively. And what we find is for people with severe epilepsy, where the only medical solution was to separate the corpus callosum to stop the seizures, suddenly the two hemispheres can no longer talk to each other. And in those people, there really is this experience of one side of their brain only knows some things, the other side knows the other, and yet they find themselves acting in a unified way, and they're totally mystified. Why am I reaching? Because I see no object here. Why is my hand reaching out? And why did I come back with an object when there's nothing in my visual field? And so, I think James was onto something there.
Yeah. My cat's locked in. I won't stop the video. I'll just run and let her out. Sorry about this, cat. There you go. See. I find these things fascinating when I'm making these videos because there's always real life going on in the background. And so my cat is trapped. She's fell asleep on the bed. She was lovely asleep when we started. She's just woken up, and then she's realised she's trapped in the room. And I know she's going to come up and meow all over me, But I find these things fascinating, the way real life comes in and tries, when you're having these incredibly deep conversations, that the cat just wants to get out. And I find that there's some sort of truth in that, is that in the end, we have ability as human beings to make these sort of these claims about the world, but my cat's not doing that, and she's doing all
Exactly. Yeah,
right.
and I mean, to bring it back to this book I've written, that's partly what the book is about. That look, it's fun to go off in the pure realm of ideas and just assert that the world is a certain way. But at some point, if you actually want to get things done in the world, you have to actually stop and make sure um, that you know how the world, the physical world works. And I can't rule out the possibility that we're living in a simulation and the physical world is not real in some sense. I still think science is the best way to study the simulation if we're in a simulation. And in fact, I don't even think the hypothesis that we're in a simulation would have come up if it weren't for science. So science is a good way of trying to reality test. I don't do it on, when I'm playing with other musicians. I don't use science to figure out how to make a solo. In fact, you know, when I've listened back to solos that I played when I played jazz, you can tell when I'm thinking because the solo gets really bad. Um, so at some point you just have to, there is this realm of going with feeling. But other times I need to actually get something done. I need to cross the street without getting hit by a car, and I can't just as an act of will say there is no car coming at me. No, that car's going to hit me whether I say there's a car or not. So,
Well, this thing, going back to this idea of the hemispheres, um, when you do any kind of art, even if you're writing or painting, and I was a painter as well, you are existing in the moment. You're on a. It's like being a surfer on a wave, and we're all and most of the time you fall off. And sometimes you manage to get on the wave and you ride it. And this thing you were saying about the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing in certain people. That to me shows that there's that we as beings, and because I find it difficult to even say that that's going on in the brain, because the brain could be a metaphor for we're, if you want to get totally subjective and postmodern. So, but whatever we're existing in, whatever's going on, it shows that there's mechanisms that are at work where there's something coming from somewhere else. There's that we're more than just rationalism, basically.
I would, but I would say, in the 2020s, based on what we know, that hemisphere, left, right is a less important distinction than the vast part of the brain that is unconscious, that is doing real work unconsciously. And I don't mean Freudian unconscious with, sexual thoughts about your mother and weird, bizarre stuff. I mean, really calculating part of the brain, but deeply unconscious. And then this tiny little part of the brain that's actually conscious. And so I do think if you just give a kid a ukulele and you put on a jazz record and say, play a solo from your heart, it's not going to sound like a good jazz solo usually. And that's because jazz musicians, the best jazz musicians, there's a scaffolding that's been built up over years of real knowledge of modes and scales and what kinds of substitutions work, different ways of harmonizing, um, knowing how to play syncopations where you're emphasizing, between the beats or play ahead of the beat or right. There's all this skill, but it is so well learned, or ideally what you strive for. It's so well learned that you don't have to consciously think of it in the moment. And it's too slow to consciously think of it in the moment. If you stop and try to consciously think, what chords could I substitute? When I'm during while I'm comping for a soloist, it's too late. By the time I realize, oh, I could do a tritone substitution, or it's too
Very
late. The moment's already passed.
When I emailed you, I said when I read these studies about music, there's certain things that they don't take into account, and I think you're now moving into that area, and maybe there are people that take this into account. I'm just not aware of it. And as we're having this conversation, when you first got in contact, I thought, oh my God, I thought this guy's brain's way bigger than mine. He's going to beat me up here. He's going to be going, you're wrong there, Andy. But I think there's a lot of consensus, and there's a lot of stuff that we're coming at the same, place. So let me offer this. I'm going to tell you my take on this. Um, Around about 20 years ago, I set up a drum school. And so I was going to have to teach drums. And I decided, from a sort of utilitarian point of view, that if I could teach drum skill really well, then I would be a good teacher. And I thought, so that's neuroscience. I'm going to have to know how the brain works. So I started to talk to a number of people and trying to read the books. I wasn't a specialist. And I became very aware that I didn't need to know the science. If I knew some neuroscientists, I could go and chat to them, and and there was a dialogue. I could say, well, this is how you learn it, and they would go, oh, that could well be down to this. And I can remember one neuroscientist saying about the fact that it's not a straight line when you learn. That you don't just get better and better. You're going up and down all the time, and you have to ride that. And he was saying that there was a part, I can't remember which part of the brain it was. Is it the? I don't want to say it, not to you, because it'd be too. I will get the words wrong, but it's the same part of the brain that causes Tourette's. And he says you're firing out random shapes and getting feedback from it. He says, I think that's what's going on here. This is why it's not a straight line. Anyway, so I was exploring all that, and I was discussing all this. Now, this drum studio that I was teaching at, it had this awful lock. And when I would arrive at night time, it's pitch black. There was no light, and you had to put your hand up inside this metal thing that protected it from being destroyed, and you had to sort of undo this, and I was having to get there half an hour earlier to just try and randomly put this key into here, and oh, I finally got it. Oh, I've dropped it. It was just a nightmare. And after a month, I came walking over to this lock. I was holding my books, and I got my key out, hand straight up, and I unlocked it. And I suddenly realised for the last few days I was doing it perfect. And I thought, what's been going on here for me to acquire this skill? That my brain's obviously been doing something at a subconscious level, because I wasn't practicing. I was just, I was doing repetitive, and I almost felt like that what had happened, my brain had almost gone, is it worth me making some sort of map of this motor skill? Is it worth it? Because I'm going to do a lot of things, but he seems to be doing it every day. So it didn't happen instantaneously. That was the thing that really interested me, was that the use of it. So when you're learning an instrument, what is the use of learning an instrument? Well, you're trying to express something, aren't you? And you go round and round and over, and you're that subconscious bit, which is doing all the sort of weights and measures of that action. So now you're trying to play a scale, and you're going over and over again, and your fingers going, oh, well, let's throw these random shapes in here. Well, that didn't work, but that quite worked. And then you're not aware of these things. This is the really difficult thing. And that was a breakthrough for me. I thought, people aren't aware. You can't make yourself do it. Right? So what you're aiming at, because you haven't got the principle, I suppose, of unlocking the lock, you have to have an aesthetic principle you're aiming at. That was a massive breakthrough to me. What are you trying to do aesthetically? What are you aiming at? And then I realized people are often trying to play fast, for example. That's not a good aesthetic goal.
Yeah.
See, so this is where I arrived. It was through, going through that type of thing. So the other thing that really interested me was martial arts. I knew some people who were doing martial arts, and they seem to go like, they're going to come at you like this, and you're going to do that, and then they come at you like this, you're going to do it. You do that so many times that when someone does go to hit you like that, you just automatically do the right movement, as opposed to doing what we would naturally want to do. And I became fascinated with all of this. And so when you play music, what's bizarre, it's almost like you're reacting on a level which is not conscious at all. That's Absolutely. The only way you can do it.
Yeah. And, I've struggled for years trying to understand how, in the Zen literature, you'll hear the phrase mindfulness, but you'll also hear the phrase no mind. Now, those seem diametrically opposed, but they seem to be talking about the same thing. And I won't say I fully understand this and I've resolved it, but I think it's both no mind and mindful, because it's partly how you deploy your attention. If you deploy your attention to actually thinking about your motor movements, I'm gonna use my middle finger now.
Mm.
You can't play music.
Oh,
That has to be so well learned. At the same time, so what is your mind actively doing? Your mind is just listening, you know, at,
reacting
and reacting. And you have to let that, it's like the staff is unconscious. The staff work is really being done. Your staff is the unconscious brain. And
but the bizarre bit in this though is that that is based upon what I would say is a moral principle. It doesn't come from like truth, undoing the lock does. But when you
yeah,
go into the arts, if you're a painter or you're a writer, all this is physical. All of it is physical. Talking's physical. And that fascinates me as well as the language. That when I'm talking to you now, I'm not consciously, moving the vocal flaps in my throat to create these shapes. The meaning, in terms of transmitting these type of meaning, is it's in another part of us. It's learned, but it's a bit the react. Oh, I'm getting myself in a knot. It's hard to think these things through. My brain's not big enough. Um, what I'm saying is that there is an aesthetic goal, which is almost like a moral, and I'll try and explain it like this. Say if I got anybody and I painted a white stripe along the ground, and it was 6 inches wide, and I said just walk up and down it. They're going to walk up and down it all day. They're never going to step off it. They're going to walk up. If I then got a wall that was 100 foot high, that was 6 inches wide, and wrote that white stripe across, we as human beings would go, oh God, I've got to do this properly. And so then we would step very carefully, which is actually worse. We would be much better off just walking straight across like we did on the ground. That would be safer, but we cannot do it because there's a part in our brain that goes, this is really important now. Almost this part that goes, I'm the boss, I better take over.
yeah, but it's partly it's the role of preparation in art and music. I mean, you have to first figure out how you got money coming in to put food on the table and take care of
Yeah.
your kids. You need a physical place where you're protected from the weather, and you have to do all this preparation. And then also musically, you got to make sure you have a working instrument if you're a musician. That it's you don't have to, but it helps. So you do all this preparation, and that's in the physical world. That's reality testing.
Yeah.
But you do it so that you can be liberated from it and not have to worry about it. And I do think so. There's always an argument about the blues, and I first I should say I own a lot of blues music. I love blues music. Still, at the same time, I have to say an awful lot of blues music is limited to minor pentatonic scale, and I love the minor pentatonic scale. But at some point, I was hungry for more. And when I learned how to hear dissonances, well, it's funny. What I call dissonance has been a moving object because things that used to seem dissonant to me don't sound dissonant at all. Like I can, suspended chords used to sound dissonant to people. Now, it's in country
Yeah.
and folk and pop, it's suspended chords. And then, flatted fifth used to sound incredibly dissonant to me. Now it's just total vanilla, it's
Yeah.
just so so I don't know, the minor pentatonic, yeah, you can be really expressive with it, but at some point I just wanted more. I love a BB King solo, but I just wanted more. And but it's not that John Coltrane is playing random notes. He's not playing, he's not playing random notes. He's studied really hard. He did the preparation to enable him to just let go. And but he's not just being totally freewheeling. There's a discipline to it. There's a structure to it.
For me, what's interesting is why he's doing it. So you go into music colleges, and everybody has tried to get through giant steps. They've learned giant steps, and some guys can get through it, but they don't understand why Coltrane was trying to do that. And the reason why he was trying to play, because he wanted to be able to play, he wanted to take the cadence. He was a jazz musician, so he saw dissonance existing in the 2-5-1. So that's the cadence. In the blues, the dissonance exists in the fact that it's minor over major, major over minor. That's the blues sound. and then the vocalization, which is in jazz as well, but it's very important in the blues. So the vocalization, that's dissonance, you know. And for me, whatever you're doing in music, you're on that white line that I described, and you're trying to balance these two things. And what we're discussing is the fact that when you make music, the mistake is when you go, right, this is really important, so I have to step in. I have to step in now to make sure this is really good, because it's just, and that's the big mystery. There's a line where Coltrane, who would practice like 10, 12, 14 hours a day, you know, it's like, who was the musician that went and they were on tour, and some jazz guy I think it was Sonny Rollins or somebody like got transfixed outside Coltrane's bedroom as he just was going through this thing. And what he was doing in the early days with the Coltrane matrix, as it's known, was taking those 2-5-1s and moving them a major third apart. And so that's the sort of equal distance between the cycle of fifths. So now you almost, if you do those 3 cadences, you're covering all 12 keys, but it's all built off a major chord as well, because it's like major thirds, you know. So in running through those cadences very fast, Coltrane's trying to bust open that harmony. He's trying to break it open. He's not trying to just go, I'll play random notes. He's trying to break open the very thing that is the fundamental structure of constants and dissonance within jazz. And why did he want to do that? Why did he want to free it like that? And the thing that drove him to do that was that aesthetic goal. And that's what makes an artist, as opposed to someone at college who's just learnt the licks and he's just playing them over that. And that is where the art is for me.
I kept hearing when I started plunging into jazz, there was a certain sound I kept hearing. What is this? What is it? And I couldn't wrap my head. I couldn't understand what. There was a certain sound that gave me a certain feeling, and it wasn't. And then finally, I discovered that it was called chordal harmony. That instead of building chords on thirds, you can build them on fourths. And I mean, that was like discovering a superpower, because suddenly you can do that, and it brings out, it's like a whole new color palette. And yeah, so if I say fourths instead of thirds, that's very intellectual, but that's not what drew me to it. I didn't know what the deal was.
Yeah,
it was a visceral feeling of, there's a certain feeling when they play a certain way. What McCoy Tyner? Why does he sound so different than Coltrane's earlier pianist? And you know, it turned out there's a system to it, but it's aesthetically, it's its own flavor, its own aesthetic experience.
What you got with, if you play a chordal chord, what's happening is you've got the cycle of fifths, and the cycle of fifths actually descends. So if you go like D minor is descending down to G, which is descending down to C. But when the cycle of fourths, you're coming up from below. That harmony, which in C would be like, what would it be? It would be like B flat, moving up to F, moving up to C. And so when McCoy Tyner plays one of those chords, and they're just there, you know, it's like if you get like if you take a minor pentatonic, and you were to take just the minor 7, and then harmonize that up onto the next set of notes in your minor pentatonic scale, that will be a chordal chord. And it's just harmonized up. So in the pentatonic scale, they just exist. And so, which is fascinating to me. And so when you play that, you're playing that chord, but you're also hinting at all the chords at the same time. And you are playing a cadence in that chord, which is coming up from, so it has this uplifting, you know, like ascending to heaven, which is what Coltrane wanted to try and get into the music. This is the bit that fascinates me, and how you can recognize it, because when you say it, I always know what you're going to say, because I know this discovery we have is not subjective.
Mm.
You know, the story, the reason why my channel is a success, I think, is because I tell a story of how I discovered rock music, heavy music. Then I moved on, that got sophisticated. Then it went to progressive rock. Then it went to jazz, and then you discover Coltrane, and there's a journey through. And you can't hear this stuff. I can remember when I was a kid buying a Santana album, and Tom Costa was playing all these, and I thought this would be really good if that keyboardist would did keep playing chords, you know. And then, you know, a few years later, you want that, and the general public don't want it. And this is another thing that it fascinates me in terms of my view of art, is this idea of the esoteric. Is that once you start to study anything, you get a knowledge which puts you inside rather than outside. That's fascinating to me. And that a musician could do it, but also a listener, because musicians are listeners as well as players, you know. And so you are on a journey, but what towards?
Yeah, I mean, if we say that chordal harmony is, you know, in fourths instead of thirds, that seems objective. And yet it's clearly not culturally universal, because there are cultures that don't use the 12-tone system. And I would imagine, I don't know, but I would imagine that their aesthetic and their visceral sense of chordal harmony is probably completely different. It's probably not startling to them, because it doesn't necessarily make any more sense than tertiary harmony. If you don't even have a 12-tone system, if you've got a 14-tone system or 18-tone system, you're in a completely different aesthetic world. So trying to figure, like, is that objective or subjective? Well, we can create a conceptual system that's objective for describing what's going on, but the fact that it doesn't happen in different cultures suggests it's not objective in the sense of universal. So
Yeah, I think you're moving to the same as we talk around this subject, which we are. It doesn't matter how you try and describe it. It doesn't matter what we say. And I've got enough theory knowledge to be able to, you know, say why these things work. And for viewers that don't understand the theory, it doesn't matter. The point is, us musicians can say, well, that happens because of that, and this happens because of that. And I've gone so deeply into this, to even, you know, if you go back to that Pythagorean view of music, you know, they're saying a fifth sounds great because of the ratio between the two numbers, you know, which is, that's the ratio. I can play it rhythmically. So harmony and rhythm are exactly the same thing. It's these ratios, and but it doesn't explain anything. It's just, this is why I keep bringing it back. We could talk about all these things that jazz musicians do, or Bach does, and it's all astonishing. But why does it work? You know, why does it make? What is it trying to make us feel? And I think the conclusion I've come to, which is sort of the fundamental message behind my whole channel, is it's always a balancing act, and it's balancing two things which may well come from the same two big things, which are actually a unification of one thing, which is our existence. But us as human beings do seem to split everything down into these two parts all the time, you know, like night and day would be an example of it, you know, or um, uh, chaos and order. And the closest I've come to in it is this idea of hedonism, pleasure, visceral excitement, being in the moment, you know, having a big party, jumping around, drinking lots. There's that aspect of art, and then there's the cathedral, you know, there's the perfection. And we know both of those things, which seem opposite, exist at the same time within art. That's my 40-year journey, was to come to that. And that's actually been very useful for me, because when I'm working, I can go, right, you're trying to be too perfect now. You need to step away from the perfection,
mm.
you know, or you need to inflict some perfection here. And that has been very useful for me to be able to speed up my creativity. And so a practical example of that would be on my YouTube. Um, if I'd have brought my perfectionist thing in, I would have spent months to make one video, and I didn't.
Mm.
And in going, these videos won't be perfect, and they're going to be wrong, and there's going to be
Mm.
mistakes, and there's horrendous mistakes on my videos sometimes, you know. Uh,
No, we love it. The viewers, I mean, it's often some of the most fun part of your videos is where you go off the rails when you've left off a major part of one of your list, or and watching how you recover is part of the fun of the
But
videos.
why is that? What? Because I think if I'm going to get quite deep, I've also got to get quite shallow. And if I'm going to set myself up as a arbiter of truth, I've
Mhm.
also got to not be I've got to be an idiot at the same time. This is what art does. It humbles you at the same time as elevating you up. There's a dichotomy always there, and it's
And it's only funny. One of the reasons it's funny. So let's take an example where you make your whole top 10 list and you suddenly realize that you've left off Emerson, Lake and Palmer. But it's too late. You've already been talking for 45 minutes. And um, well, that's very funny for me. But I know it's very funny for me, partly because I've already learned the trope of the top 10 list, the rules of the game,
yeah.
that this is a very solemn undertaking and a great deal of thought goes into this. And you're not supposed to change your mind at the last second. You're supposed to make a commitment. And so it's only because I know all the rules of that cultural trope that it's funny, because you violated the expectation. And that's what a lot of good art is
And then
violating
on the other side,
violating an expectation. So
when I did a lot of work to set up my YouTube, once I thought, when I did the Mahavishnu top 10, which was just, I was bored in COVID, and he had so many views, and then I started to do some research, and I realized I would have to make a lot of videos, and a lot of the time, from a practical point of view, I've got one go. If it goes wrong, then I have to switch it off and then get on to the rest of my life. I can't go sit and retaking. And so that originally came out of just a practical need. And the very first time that happened was when I couldn't remember the Tony Banks' name from Genesis. And
mhm.
I couldn't remember his name. And I remember thinking, as I was doing it, I was thinking, they're going to think absolutely incompetent now because I've got this channel and I cannot remember the keyboard player of Genesis's name. This is like, it's a heresy. This is. And
But
really,
it's fun, it's the thing is, it is fun for us as viewers to yell at the screen and say, Andy, it's Tony Banks, Tony Banks, you prat,
how can you not know
that's part
this?
of the fun.
Yeah.
If I come out with a book called Third Millennium Thinking, from I've got a target on my back. From now on, anytime I say something stupid, people will say, you're not so smart. But that's a way I bring joy into the world, because sometimes it's fun to see somebody screw up, and but again, the only reason we know you screw up is because we've already learned how it's supposed to work, how a well-organized musical criticism format is supposed to work. And because you don't take it so seriously, it's the times where you violate the script, because we know the script, when you violate it, we wake up, we suddenly, we have to pay attention.
Now there's a key. You've just said something really important there about people waking up.
Mm,
Because I do have a very strong. My mum and dad were scientists, so I got brought up my dad was really into logic, and he used to sit and explain logic to me and how that worked, and I had to have really respect scientists, so I had that in me. The mystical side of me comes from Gurdjieff, and he believed that he had a bunch of systems, and it's the same guy that Robert Fripp, he got it through J.G. Bennett, but that was an idea of waking up, of
mm,
being conscious, and this is very odd. We get to an area because I haven't really discussed this. If you're doing a gig, right, and I've done some amazing gigs, and you can be on stage in front of 30,000 people, in a moment where you're improvising and you're in this incredible moment, and it doesn't, for the rest of your life you're going to remember that. And I always think if you can remember something, it's because you were conscious at that moment. That life sometimes wakes you up, and that's one of the things that art does, is it wakes you up. and
Mhm.
that is not about being in the moment, and it's not about being stuck. It's beyond that. That's what music does. I can't really. I haven't thought this one out, but that is really important to me, because when you're in there, you're almost sort of unconscious at the same time, but you can remember everything. I'm sure you've had the same experiences sometimes when it happens.
Yeah, when I play in front of 30,000 people, no, I think maybe I played in front of 30 people before, but I do think I know what you're talking about because I mean, I have certain musical memories. One of my musical memories is I was taking a solo and the trumpet player I was playing with, I was kind of watching his face while I was playing. And he's kind of going like this and he's just kind of looking around. And all of a sudden he looks up at me. And I just knew that at that moment, somehow I did something he didn't expect. And he looked up and smiled. And it was like, that was a good solo. I just remember that moment. And those moments are elusive. You're
Oh,
chasing after
they,
them. For me, they don't come very often and they're very fleeting.
but they can come more often if you're aware of how I suppose how beauty works and how truth works and how those things are. I think that is what music education is. And I think you can get to that by talking about it. That's the bizarre concept I have, is if you talk about this. So um, and so this is the sort of thing I would do on the channel, for example. Um, There is in 1959 they did a video of the John Coltrane Quintet with the Miles Davis Quintet with John Coltrane, very famous Sound of Jazz, black and white. Everyone's seen that version of So What, and it's great. They're in a TV studio and it's filmed in that sort of early postmodern thing, so you can see the TV cameras and it's all sort of we're not going to pretend we're not in a TV studio type of thing. And Miles and the rest of the band are so cool, and he comes out and he does his thing. And then when Coltrane steps up,
Smoking a
Miles is in the
cigarette.
background having a cigarette like this, and they're
A
so
cigarette, yeah.
cool. And then Coltrane plays this thing, and I can tell, I know how it goes. He goes, he does that thing where it seems he's taking these notes and he's moving the top and bottom of these notes, and then suddenly expands out,
Mhm.
and you can see them go like that, and then they have to try and get back to be cool again, and it's that moment. And there's another one on another very famous video, which is in the 1985 Blue Note put a night on, and they got all the legends just before they were going to start passing away, and they got all the legends together. Art Blakey was on it, and um, uh, Charles Lloyd was on it, and they basically put that Miles's quintet with Herbie Hancock back together, but with Freddie Hubbard, and they do Cantaloupe Island. It's fantastic. Tony Williams, Joe Henderson on sax, Freddie Hubbard, Ron Carter, and Herbie Hancock. And when Herbie Hancock goes into his piano solo after Freddie Hubbard's, which is astonishing, he starts playing, and Freddie Hubbard's he's pulling faces because Herbie's taking it to place. And there's one bit where Freddie Hubbard goes like that. Isn't that? He sort of goes, "What? Oh, fair enough." And I just, as a kid, it's those moments, isn't it? That are. But what is it? What are they? And you as an expert in truth, is it? Are you doing something truthful there? Because there's a part of me that goes, "Well, you are sort of." There's another part of me going, "Well, no, it's nothing to do with truth."
Yeah, sometimes though, maybe it's useful to distinguish between genuineness and truth. And sometimes what's going on, it's not truth in some objective platonic sense, but genuineness in that there's no artifice, or you're not trying to do something to impress someone. You are simply putting something out in a very genuine way. And I think sometimes it's a genuineness, and we can recognize it. We can agree when we see someone doing something really genuine, even if we don't like it, it feels genuine to us. But is that truth? I don't know if that's the same thing as truth.
That is brilliant. That this idea of genuineness, that is not truth, it's genuineness.
Maybe it's not capital T, genuine. It's not capital T truth. It's true to, you're being true to if we say true to yourself, that doesn't mean it's capital T truth in some universal sense. It just means it coheres with who you are, and but I don't know what I'm talking about.
No, you want to, so you are, I
I
mean,
feel it, and you know what I'm
yeah,
talking
and I
about.
know, and I
Figure
know
out what
enough to
is
go,
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
and the thing is, I think it's the same thing as being a jazz musician. This thing we talked about. You studied this all your life, and we've argued this. Not argued. We discussed it. We've got to this point, and the idea of genuineness. I think we've got to something important here. Is that the thing in art that seems like truth is the true being true to yourself, which is what being genuine is. Genuine's the perfect word, isn't it?
Mhm.
It's being true to yourself, not trying
And
to fool anybody, not trying to.
it could be for a musician. I think sometimes it can be a bit of a burden. Poor Robert Fripp just torments himself with because his experience. He's chasing after that all the time, and in his writings, you can tell he just seems miserable a lot of the time because it's so hard to line up everything to get that. And he gets these wonderful musicians, but they don't always set up the same conditions he wants, and he gets mad at them. And yet they're being genuine to themselves. Adrian Belew is incredibly genuine. He's not doing it Fripp's way, but he's incredibly genuine. But yeah, I mean, because it is like you're chasing after this thing, and it's so elusive, and it can be there's a little bit of a tragic element. And once you've tasted that, how do you get it back? And you may never, there's always a fear you'll never be able to taste that again. So
The thing is that we've all got many faces, haven't we? As Gurdjieff would say, man is not one eye; it's multiple eyes. We have we're all things to all people, and when we like that, we're not genuine. When you start to pick an instrument and play, you're suddenly faced with who you are. And when you first start playing the instrument, that's the frustration because you are faced with that on a daily basis. So it's like you go, why don't I practice enough? Why can't I get this nailed? I'm not good enough. I haven't got that talent. And all that is what you're up against. And but everything you're trying to do, all the preparation you're trying to do, and I think you mentioned preparation earlier, and I think that's very important. All this preparation you are trying to do is to be in that moment, to be yourself. And we end with this quote from John McLaughlin that it's where he says, "It is only through improvisation that we can know who we are." And so, is art really about the truth of art? Is finding out who we are, or me finding out who you are, and realizing that there's a similarity, and that's the objectivity. Is listening to Coltrane and going, I know what he's talking about.
mhm. Yeah.
I think I think we got to the end. I think we've got there. That was
Left me speechless. Yeah. Yeah. No,
that's yeah. It's your ability to nudge this along gently with your knowledge is there's a couple of times just in this conversation where I've just had that my stomach's just gone, oh my God, yeah. Very simple as well, genuine.
yeah. This
Genuine.
was fun. I love this. I love talking about this stuff. Yeah.
So if you're a musician, how do you be genuine, and how do you prepare to be genuine? I mean, that's the next question. Because I'm an educator, I always want to be able to teach something to people. And of course, I believe the best teachers don't really know what they arrive at them. The best lesson is when the teacher arrives there. I'll be teaching someone drums and I'm trying to work out why they can't do it, and I'm trying to work out why I can't tell them what to do. And then suddenly you try this, you try that, and then suddenly it works. And it's almost like you have a revelation and you go, oh my God, do you know why you can't do that? It's because of this, this, and this. And you tell it to them and they go, yeah, that's what I'm like. Yeah. But so what you're going to do is this. They go, oh my God, I hadn't thought of it. It's on that level
Mhm.
because it has to line up with who you are. Music has to line up with who you are. And this is not just mentally, physically. We have some have big hands, small hands. Some people have long limbs. If you're a drummer, you really become aware of this. You know, and so it's not just your mind; it's your body as well. Those things are all working, and you have to be genuine to that. Because the thing I've become very aware of with teaching drums and guitar to some extent, we all want to be able to play fast, right? That's another discussion why that is. But some people are just faster than others. It's in their muscles. You get these thin, wiry people, and they can probably run really fast, and they're very like that in their movements, and that's a physical thing. And when you try and teach them, I can literally have a kid, and once they've got their hand right and the preparation's correct, they go for it, and they're faster than me straight off because they're just naturally faster. And then you get other guys that they're much more solid, and they can't play so fast. And one of the things that I think may be the case is there's all these people all over the net that can play really fast, and they're these small wiry people, and they're like that in themselves. But the grooves that sold 1 million records are all by the people who have that much more centered, So someone like John Bonham, for example, or Steve Gadd, obviously they can play relatively fast, but you feel that there's a weight in the way they play, and so you have to be true to those. You have to be true. You can't shift that when you're learning an instrument. You can't change that, and it's why all the great musicians sound different. I think, but I think we've got there, Rob. I think this has been an excellent conversation.
Yeah, a lot of fun. I really enjoyed talking with you about it.
Yeah, I think we will wrap it up there. And thanks for coming on. And would you like to come on in another time if there's a
Sure. This has been fun. I'd love to.
Because I know I'll go away and think about this. But yeah, I really have enjoyed this, and I think we've got to somewhere. I think. Who knows? It all could be nonsense, couldn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
There's always that feeling. Okay, then. Okay. Thanks for that. Shall we say bye to everybody?
Okay.
Bye, everybody.
Talk to you
Bye.
again.